You're tuned to 1520 WCHE Radio, and it's time now for the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will offer reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today. And now, Sam Hankin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by our own independent bookstore, Wellington Square Books, winner of the Best Bookshop in Philadelphia this year, as well as the Best Coffee Shop, both of which awards we are extremely proud of. Today we're pleased to have with us Assaf Gavron, author of The Hilltop, translated from the Hebrew by Stephen Cohen, and published by Scribner's in October of this year. Assaf's novel Almost Dead first brought his name to America, and now with The Hilltop, which is acclaimed as the great Israeli novel, especially with accolades from the likes of Khaled Hosseini, author of The Kite Runner, and Kalam Mekan, author of Let the Great World Spin, he has really entered our culture and our consciousness as a satirist, but a satirist with absurd overtones. Well, sometimes maybe more than overtones. But the thing is, once you get behind that, and these methods work very well, there's a profound and a poignant message to his works. So welcome, Assaf, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you start off by telling our listeners and me a little bit about Ronnie and Gabi, and then we can move on from there. Okay,
so Ronnie and Gabi are the two main characters, probably, in a cast of quite a few.
I'll say.
I mean, the book, The Hilltop, most of it takes place in a remote settlement in the West Bank, where about 12 families or couples or singles are living, and you have this whole cast of characters. But Ronnie and Gabi, two brothers who are two of those living there, we go back with them to their childhood in a kibbutz in the Galilee, and then further on through the separate and very different journeys through life that take them to Tel Aviv in some occasions, and later to the United States, and then back to Israel and to this settlement. They're very different from each other. One, Gabi, is this shy, quiet, introvert kind of person, but he's prone to very severe temper attacks of violence throughout his life. The other, Ronnie, is more of a typical Israeli kind of macho type, a go-getter, someone who's trying to achieve everything. He's the star of the basketball team in his youth, and later in an elite commando unit in the IDF, and then goes to become a businessman in Tel Aviv, and does then goes to business school in New York and to investment banking. So until at one point everything kind of crushes down on him. So both of them kind of complement each other, and their relationships with other people and with each other are one of the main focuses of the novel.
Yeah, they do complement each other, because Gabi, especially at an early age, does some really mean things that he just does, and it almost as if he doesn't have a thought process before it. He just kind of impulsively does it. And then on the other side, Ronnie is kind of, has all this chutzpah and background and all that, but he's kind of a con man at times. So they do complement each other, don't they? It's kind of an admixture of characters.
Yes, and I think that in some ways they represent two sides of Israeliness, as well as complementing each other. They both represent two sides of Israeliness. I'm not claiming that their characteristics or these types of people do not exist everywhere. Of course they do, and all of these things that I described can be found in anyone, anywhere. But there is something about the Israeli character, about this chutzpah, about trying to kind of walk your way through the lines a bit, maybe not exactly by the rules, which is also true for the settlements in general and the way they are formed. But they are also filled with these believers, these introverts, these softer kinds of Gabi-like people. So somehow I think those two characters managed to, for me, to represent both the settlement project and also Israel in a larger picture.
So here in America, and because these two novels are the only ones translated thus far, here in America, people hear settlement, they hear kibbutz, they hear Gaza Strip, they hear Palestinians, they hear West Bank, and I think it's a big hodgepodge for Americans. So maybe you could explain the difference between what a settlement and a kibbutz is, and where these settlements are located in terms of geography.
Okay, yeah, I will do so, and just in one sentence before I do it, I'll say that a novel for me, is a great way to make sense of things, to learn about different parts of the world, or about periods in history that I don't know much about. So for me, a novel is a great way to get into things. So very briefly, the Jewish settlements in the West Bank are perhaps the hottest point of contention between Israelis and Palestinians, between Israelis and the U.S. And Europe, and also among Israelis themselves. It's an ongoing ticking bomb that seems to be permanent almost. And the gist of the argument is this. The settlers claim that the West Bank is part of the historical land of Israel given to the Jews by God, settled by them throughout history. And what's more, it's needed from a strategic point of view because of its height and the way that geographically it protects the whole of Israel. The opponents of the settlements claim that it is contested land. It's been occupied by Israel in a war in 47 years ago. It's not internationally recognized as part of Israel, and it's not officially or by law part of Israel. And the main thing for the opponents, it's populated by 3 million Palestinians, while the number of Jews is much smaller. So really, in a nutshell, it's seen as the settlement seen as the main obstacle for a peaceful agreement between Israel and Palestine, and maybe the reason for, or one of the main reasons behind the fact that the conflict is still ongoing and doesn't seem to be reaching any solution in any time in the near future, and today's news, demonstrated with a murder in a synagogue of 4 Jews in Jerusalem,
including rabbis.
Yeah,
but and that's so tragic. And here's where the reviewers, especially, have talked about the satirical aspect of your book, because if you look at the bureaucracy associated with the settlements, it's worse than what I perceive in America, and it's almost Kafkaesque, or like a novel by Nikolai Gogol. For example, when the settlement goes up, it's illegal, so that the trailers are there illegally, but then they can't take them away because you need authorization before you can take them away. So they're there illegally, but they can't be taken away because there's more bureaucracy that has to be involved. And it's really funny. But is it really true?
Exactly. I heard a story exactly like that. As unbelievable as it sounds, as comical as it sounds, and it is full of really conflicting and contradicting bureaucracy, because there's no clear law. The Israeli law does not apply because, as I said before, it's not officially part of Israel. Army law or army rule applies to some of the area, but other parts of the area are administered by other bodies. And so sometimes, government officials or government ministries, they don't know what's going on under their supervision, with maybe one person who's sympathetic to the settlers will help them and give them a little budget or a little something, and then someone else will try to obey a law that doesn't allow that, and then we'll take it away And it's just full of this, and it is tragic in a way. It is a conflict, that we talked about today's news. It's sad and people die, but at the same time, it's kind of absurd. And I try to explore this double-sided situation in my novel, and to show it, and to show the absurdity, but at the same time, not showing, giving respect to the serious story at the same time.
Yeah, it's so funny because the military protects them even though they shouldn't be there, and then they come with a generator that's 10 times as powerful as their generator, and the guy asks, can we hook up to it? And he says, yes, but he winks when he says, sure, why not? And then, which is so, it's so much us. And then the other one is if you get an order of debarkment or whatever it was called, debarkation, if this was Nazi Germany, that would be the end of your life. But here it's just like, oh, yeah, okay, we got this. We can handle it. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. And it goes on throughout the story, and actually it goes on throughout reality, because, the settlements exist for over 40 years, and from time to time there's a high court order for this or that one, for demarcation or evacuation, or however you call it, and then maybe the army will come and try and manage to evacuate a couple of trailers, and the next day
they're back.
They're back. It does happen like that.
And it's funny how and I know you mean it humorously, and people have taken it, the way you begin the book, and every once in a while when you talk about the sunset like a veil over the Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a very biblical kind of context, especially in the beginning. But that brought me to the question, and you touched upon it, is what really is the difference as to where you are? What is place? What is home? What is especially in Israel, like when you go to the hilltop, what is the spot where you can be free in spirit and in autonomy? And why are these settlements like that? When you're living out of a container, from a container ship, or you're living out of a like that.
Yeah, well, for them, place is everything. For them, as we said, it was given by God, and it's ours. It belongs to the Jewish people, and it's more important to be on the land and hold on to it than to have a nice villa in America, for example, or more comfortable life. For them, it's ideals over personal convenience, and I'm not saying it. I do admire it, but I want to also point out that I do not necessarily agree with them. I do not. Politically, I'm opposed to the settlement, but I do admire this kind of passion that they still have. Maybe the last place in Israeli society where this passion still exists, these ideals over personal convenience, and this is for them the most important thing.
The funny thing is, one of the funny things is when the leftists come up to protest the settlements and they have those canvas banners, I like the way that after they leave and they leave their banners, the settlers use those banners, practically speaking, and that's another really funny part of the book too.
Yeah, for fences or to mark territories or stuff like that, the settlers use those banners with leftist kind of
slogans,
sentences and proclamations, but then also the Arabs use banners of the right wing of the settlers to their own fields and stuff. And that's another thing that I saw in my own eyes, and that are kind of really funny about this whole bizarre situation there. And another thing is that they sometimes in a strange way, those who are supposedly on opposing sides, the Palestinians and the settlers, would join forces because they'll have a shared interest, for example, against the building of the separation wall in the West Bank, when the army comes and tries to pave the way for the wall to be built, actually both sides are opposed to that.
Yeah, no, it's like, what is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. It's a bit like this kind of circle, that the left and the right, instead of a one line from left to right that they are far away, it's like a circle that the far left and the far right meet at the same spot.
It's such a strange world, because you think of, say, the Irish, or you think of the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Shiites, which all cobbled together by Winston Churchill after the war, or you think of all these other people that have been fighting for 5,000 years, and there's no reasoning behind it. They've almost forgotten what exactly it is they're fighting over, and they all stem from the same religion. And I've never been able in my mind, logically speaking, to understand why the differences exists. And do you have a gloss on that, why you feel that there's still this hatred and enmity amongst people who really should be getting along?
Yeah, for me, living and growing up in this conflict, I do see the differences because people point them out. But, the Irish that you mentioned is a good example, because we as Israeli, or as Jews, we don't see, I know that it will sound strange, but we don't see much difference between Protestants and Catholics, because we say, oh, they're both Christians. And for years, we just couldn't get around this. So, yeah, in Israel, and especially in days like this, and in periods of conflict, and we had a big war in the summer and everything, from the inside, it looks very separated and very hostile. But I completely understand, through this example of the Irish, how strange it's looking from the outside. But I also add that the Irish example is, it kind of gives me some hope, because it was an even longer conflict, and even more hatred, and even more death. And, they managed, probably, looks like it, to get around it. So maybe it gives us hope for us. I don't know.
I don't know either. It's interesting that you are a country like the size of New Jersey, surrounded by almost like an entire United States of enemies in different countries that refuse to even acknowledge your right to exist. But because of what happened in World War II and after, Israelis have decided that, never again. And so, they seem to be the best soldiers on the face of the earth. And it seems as if there's no way, even if it involves their own annihilation, that they're going to allow themselves to be treated the way they were.
Yes, and the world too. The world, after the Holocaust, also cannot really oppose Israel all the way. There is a lot of criticism and a lot of attempts to kind of find a way, but because of the history, both the Israelis and the world realized that Israel must exist in some way or other, and of course the whole thing is so complicated and so complex, and there's so many different views and ways and opinions. I hope that a novel like mine can make some sense of the complexity, because a novel is a good way to see, to understand complex situations.
Yeah, and of course, and I didn't think you were kind of telling the truth, but in your interviews you say your novel is not a political statement. And I thought, well, maybe it really is, but then today you kind of defused that yourself, because you're saying that you don't have a stance, but you did say that you don't think the settlements should be allowed. So there is some political stance there.
No, I have an opinion, but I don't use it in fiction. I try. I have other places, like, for example, this interview, or opinion pieces in newspapers or anywhere else. I don't hide my views, but I think the novel should not be a political statement and should not be didactic or try to educate or tell people what to think. I think it should, or at least this is what I try to do, to show the way things are and to show human beings how people live in such situations and to make sense of it all. But of course, when I show the bureaucracy and I use the satire, I think that the reader can understand that I'm not a huge supporter of the settlements or the way that they exist and prosper. But the political thing was not my aim here.
No, it wasn't. I understood that early on. But, you know, it's funny to me, and I guess also it arises because I am Jewish. Oh, and by the way, I went to high school with Benjamin Netanyahu, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because his father, I guess, was a consulate, and it was just outside of Philadelphia, so we went to Cheltenham High School together. He was older than me, but he seemed like, oh, well, this is what I was leading to. When you listen to him speak at the United Nations, as opposed to, say, a Palestinian leader, it's like the difference between listening to Obama and George W. Bush. So you listen to this very articulate, well-spoken, very gently speaking man who seems so logical, and then you listen to someone who's pounding the table and speaking essentially nonsense, in my opinion. And to me, I always admire that aspect of him, whatever you may think of what he wants to do for Israel and to Israel. But I think it's important that your leaders be articulate. I don't know if everyone appreciates that, but I think, how do you feel about him and the way he comes off? Well,
he is certainly very articulate. I don't think his speeches are as impressive as Obama's, but maybe it's a matter of the content. But he definitely knows how to speak, and you know, that's part of his charisma and the fact that he's popular and he's the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel and will probably continue to be for a number of years. I disagree with his politics. Even today, after the murder, he blamed Abu Mazen, he blamed the Palestinian leader. When he was not in power in Israel, and such incidents happened under different prime minister, he blamed the Israeli leadership. And now when he is the leader, he blames someone else. I disagree with him politically, but I agree with you that he is a good speaker for sure.
Yeah, but what you're describing about the political situation is not that much different than what happens in America on a regular basis, especially now with the Tea Party candidates and all that. I mean, everybody points the finger at Obama when what he inherited was a situation that was created by I'm going to get in trouble, by the Republicans. Well, so, you know, here's the thing I think most of the world wonders, and I wonder too, and as a Jew I wonder, is what do you think will happen? I mean, this is an ongoing crisis that's always smoldering and bursts into flames periodically, but here we have us talking to Iran about its nuclear program, and I know how Netanyahu feels about that, and we also have ISIS and our presence in Iraq again and in Afghanistan. What do you think is going to happen in the short run and in the long run, or do you?
I don't know, but you know, if anything that I learned in my life in Israel is that there's always been rounds of conflict every year or two, a war or some kind of period of violence. I'm talking specifically about Israel, of course, and there's been also some attempts for peace, and there's been peace agreements with Egypt and with Jordan, and one that failed with the Palestinians. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't see something extraordinary happening now. It's the new phase, you know, ISIS and Syria and all that. That's the current force, the current phase to be reckoned with. But it seems like an ongoing thing. Israel, to me, is strong, and from the Israeli perspective, all that stuff that's happening in Egypt and in Syria and in Lebanon is probably in Israel's favor because they're so hooked up in their own troubles, so they don't care much about Israel at the moment.
Right.
But it's kind of a depressing conclusion, but it just seems to go on, and I don't know where it's going to come from. I try to be optimistic, and as I mentioned before, with Ireland, maybe someday someone will come up and will find a way to reach peace. I believe that most people simply want to live in quiet and in peace. It's hard to see where it's going to come from.
Yeah, it's true. I think what it generally comes from in the world, even in World War II, is it's like the cult of personality. It's like two people who are reasonable people, and they end up, whether it's Churchill and Roosevelt, or whether it's when the peace accord was reached, with Israel and Egypt, you had two reasonable people that drove, and that's what seems to happen in the world. It always boils down to this, whether it's Gandhi or Mother Teresa or whoever it is, it's someone who's an example, or Martin Luther King.
I agree, and sometimes it's even surprising because Begin, who did it with Egypt, the Israeli Prime Minister, he came from the other side, from the supposedly more right wing and conflicting side, but he had the courage and the popular support to pull it through. So, Netanyahu, if we go back to him, doesn't seem like the one who will have that courage, but who knows? Maybe he more than anyone would like to end his long career as prime minister being remembered as the one who did it. I don't know. Maybe this is really too far on the optimistic scale, but who knows?
Well, I have this friend, Harry, and he's a fundamentalist Christian, and he actually believes that the world was created 4,000 years ago and that God planted the fossils as a test of our faith. And we argue, and we get to the point where we can't argue anymore, and I finally say, Harry, how can you be so intelligent, which he is extremely intelligent. He learned Greek to learn the Bible in Greek. Very intelligent man. And I say, how can you be so intelligent and believe this stuff? And he looks at me and he says, Sam, how can you be so intelligent and not believe it? And then our argument ends, but neither of us have gotten anywhere. I'm certain in my opinion, and he is certain in his. So,
yeah, I know it well. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's frustrating.
It is, especially when your country is locked in this bloody, ongoing conflict. It is.
And then, and America foments it just like we did with Ebola. It's like during the second Gulf War, when supposedly the Scud missile was this incredible weapon, and basically they were just lobbing used hot water heaters at us, or sorry, not at us, at Israel. And Israel's responding with batteries of Patriot missiles, which are incredibly sophisticated. And now you have your iron shield, which essentially is that. And so it's always amazing to me, again, with the help of the United States, but also with the help of the fact that, there's so much knowledge and intelligence and Nobel Prize winners in Israel that, I sound like jingoistic here, but it's just that there's so much preparation and readiness for the worst that could possibly come, that it sometimes seems to me that you're almost impregnable, Yeah,
I see what you mean. Yeah, but by over preparing, we actually bring it on. Yeah,
I know.
It's true. I mean, I don't think that we should not be prepared, because the Iron Dome proved to protect people this summer. But I do think that this over-concentration on military and on growing the army and putting most of the budget on the security side is eventually a bad thing for Israel, because other parts of the country suffer. The economy and the people and the culture. For me, that's one of the problems that we have in Israel. This over-militaristic society.
Yeah, and again, your country is split too, because it's like, and even more so than in the United States, because you have been through a situation where you've almost been exterminated, and you want to prepare for that to never ever happen again. So it's a much stronger belief. But what you're saying, and what I didn't really know until we started talking, is that there really are two different. There's a schism, a political schism in your country that's really a real divide. Correct?
Yeah, there's a huge divide, and I think the more this is ongoing, the more the conflict is ongoing, and it's easier for people to go to the more militaristic side, the anti-Arab side, the anti-peace side, and this is sad for me. And the threats are there, we have threats, and we saw it today, and we saw it over the summer. But we are strong at the same time, and we have the ability to try something else. We didn't try enough. We tried wars many times, but we tried peace only a couple of times, and even if it failed, it's worth trying again.
Well, that's an excellent sentiment. And before we end, I did want to talk about the fact that so you've written several more novels. They haven't been translated. Are there any plans now, since this is so popular and your last book was so popular, to translate the other ones as well?
Yes, they are. We're trying to work on that. The question is always, I'm also working on a new novel, so should we wait for the new one, or should we go back to the old ones? But I hope that we'll have both, that I will continue to publish new novels and get them translated into English, but then that my readers here will get a chance to go back and see some of my previous works.
It's funny. I know you've been very modest about it, and I guess you almost have to be, but when people label your book as the great Israeli novel, and I realize you don't, you've been very, polite about that comment, but why do you think it originated? Who decided this was the great Israeli novel, and why do you think they decided that?
Well, it was written in one Israeli newspaper, and also, again, here in the States, where the writer compared me to Jonathan Franzen, who's writing great American novels, which for me is very flattering because I'm a huge fan. And I think he saw the comparison in dealing with today's issues, but doing it in a comic way, in some kind of a comic edge, and also, spreading the net wide and going over decades and over and wide in geography also. I think it was called, the Hilltop was called the Great Israeli Novel because it shows Israel today through different characters who all represent different faces of Israeli society today, but it also goes back to the 70s and 80s and 90s and show Israelis in different places and also outside of Israel. So I think the whole picture gives you a good way to look into today's Israel, and especially the settlements who somehow came to represent the way Israel is behaving and also seen from outside in the present.
I understand a lot better now, because thinking about it, when you think about Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections, it takes a dysfunctional family, which essentially you've done too, to a slightly larger extent, and the dysfunctional family almost describes society as a whole, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well...
I mean, again, I will be modest when mentioning him because he's a huge writer for me, but I would agree that that description is accurate. I mean, showing the individual, showing the human being, showing a very specific family and their lives, but having it resonate larger into society and show larger things about the whole society.
Well, thank you so much, Assaf, for being here today, and I hope when your books are translated or when your next novel comes out, you can come back and talk to us again. I really enjoyed this talk.
Me too. I'd love to come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was Assaf Gavron talking about his book, The Hilltop, which is becoming what, as many reviewers have said, the great Israeli novel. And you heard Assaf compare it to Jonathan Franzen's, whose books are small books in the sense of describing a number of people, but large books in the aspect of using those people as individual nomens, if you will, or individual place markers for society itself and the various aspects of society that lead us to resolution, to conflict, to partnerships, to divorces, to enmity, and to friendship. And that was pretty good off the cuff. Anyway, so join us next week on The Avid Reader. We have a lot of people coming up. It's hard for me anymore to say who's next because I'm doing so many of these. But it'll definitely be an insightful and engaging discussion, as it was today, with some of the world's most compelling authors. And actually, some of the upcoming interviews include local people. Maybe the next one, I think, might be Stanley Warren, who's an excellent novelist whose books are all available on Amazon, but whose work is like, he writes for himself, so he's not interested in creating a bestseller. But when you read his stuff, which is all available at our store, you go to the front table where all the bestsellers are, even like Gone Girl, and you see his writing is so much more. His writing is literature. The writing on the front table is novels. It's the kind of work that you want to listen to, read, because it's enjoyable. Stanley's is work, but the work is justly rewarded by an understanding of what he's trying to tell you. So as always, thank you so much for joining us here. I love doing this. Assaf was a great guest today, and I look forward to talking with another author next week and to you listening to me. Thanks again.
You've been listening to The Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will be back next week with reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today.